There are no doubt some of you out there who see our featured guest this afternoon as the Darth Vader of the media, or certainly the newspaper industry. I am not one of them. That title I would reserve for a somewhat more publicly visible individual who believes we are all purveyors of that toxic commodity he has dubbed fake news. Our featured guest is not among those, I don't think, who believes in such calumny heaped on what most of us have chosen as our life's calling. The principal evidence of his feelings was most apparent in his quite generous donation to one of the great institutions that stands as a bulwark against fake news. And so it was with not a moment's hesitation that I invited the dean of that institution to serve as our interlocutor today. That's why you see two chairs up here. You may have wondered. I am, of course, referring in the first instance to Craig Newmark, the founder of the eponymous Craigslist, and as interlocutor, the dean of the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at the City University of New York, a lifelong campaigner against fake news, Sarah Bartlett. So without further ado, Craig and Sarah. And she promises to be tough on him too.
Thank you. I feel like I'm in a throne. Do you feel like you're in a throne?
Not often enough.
So thank you all for joining us today for what I hope will be a very engaging conversation with someone who I've come to know and have very high regard for. And I say that not just because he wrote us a very big check. And I'd like to start by sharing a story from Friday. Our school had our commencement on Friday. We're a 3-semester master's program. And we had Jorge Ramos was our keynote, and we had the trustee came and gave a speech, and the chancellor came and gave a speech, and everyone who gave a speech was like, and we want to thank Craig Newmark for his incredible support of our school. Craig, unfortunately, was not in the audience, so he did not hear any of this, but afterwards, I was with the parents who were greeting me on behalf of their graduate students, and one of them said, by the way, that was a really great ceremony, but who is Craig Newman? And so my first question to you is, who is Craig Newman?
Basically, I'm a guy who grew up in Jersey, not far from here. Grew up as in the 1950s as the original style nerd, meaning good in science and engineering, technology, poor in human matters, marginal social skills, and even now I'm only simulating social skills for your benefit. Sounds like a joke, isn't? But I was strongly affected by Mr. and Mrs. Levin in the Sunday school, who suggested we should treat people like we want to be treated, and to know when enough is enough. Then Mr. Shulsky in high school history, who taught me that a trustworthy press is the immune system of democracy. And he also imbued in me a fanaticism for those rights enumerated in the Bill of Rights and its following amendments. Beyond that, I did, in fact, stay a nerd, went into computer sciences, did Craigslist, but now there I just do a little customer service, and now almost all my time is philanthropy.
So in the last year or so, I think it's fair to say you've contributed about $50 million to journalism and journalism-related organizations. But who's counting?
Well, if you like that, the next announced number will be much larger, but I'll leave that for later because otherwise Estelle over there will hurt me. Or Mabel might hurt me.
Yes, Mabel. We all know Mabel.
She's very mean, Mabel.
She's his accountant. And Craigslist's accountant, CFO, right?
Craigslist and my own financial officer.
So the $50 million that you've given in the last year, 20 of it to our school. Before that, much smaller numbers and really focused on a different variety of things, voter protection, veterans issues, women in technology. So what changed? What made you take this leap into this crazy field that this room is full of veterans from?
There was no leap. It was gradual growth, because in 2006, at an Aspen Institute thing, I was plunged into a cauldron of people involved in professional news. Editors like Arthur Sulzberger Jr., there were publishers, reporters of all sorts, and they seemed very eager to learn something about journalism. I should know something about the field because that would be important. I've learned a little, but you never really know anything unless you're in a job where you have to write every day or so to deadline and then have your work severely edited and then the headline written in a manner that might not be to your pleasing. So I'm strictly an outsider, but I started learning then a lot about what journalism might be, where help might be needed. But this was a very slow kind of thing. It accelerated around November of 2016 because that was a wake-up call for all of us, realizing that we had an all-hands-on-deck deal where things had gone pretty bad in a hurry, and it was now time for us to work together, make things better for everyone.
So I'm guessing you have a big target on your back now that you've made these kinds of contributions, and I'm wondering, how do you figure out, I mean, there's so many needy causes out there, there's so many great organizations, how do you make your selection?
I don't have much of a target on my back in that the people I work with who publish the provocative stuff, they have problems. Data and Society published reports on the so-called alt-right and its networking and related matters, including harassment and so on. They have targets on their back because they're doing stuff, including exposing some genuinely bad people. They have to take extra security precautions and so on. That's really scary. People who really have targets on their back are, say, Russian journalists who routinely get murdered. There's Maria Resser, I should say the heroic Maria Resser from Philippines, who the government there is now trying to put her away using trumped-up charges. So my work is pretty half-assed. I am now supporting some of the people in this country who are doing the dangerous work. I may not mention that work at all, because these are people who are subject to genuine physical danger. And if I say anything about them, it will only be after considering what will the consequences be. Because these people are the kind of people who do get shot at.
Do you ever worry about your own security?
I'm having it reviewed. Not really much worry because the professionals I'm talking to say that I only should really fear my sense of humor.
So what do you, when you sort of look at the landscape, what is your view of the future of the field of journalism?
I do think journalism is quickly moving into a place where it will be more trusted and respected, and people will pay for it. That means stuff like, you'll be able to figure out with some help what news stories, what outlets, what platforms you can trust as they start to adhere to things like the Trust Project and they start to enforce advanced journalistic ethics like, well, as Dan Gilmore says, don't be a loudspeaker for liars. If a newspaper knows that someone they're considering talking, if they know that person is going to lie, they shouldn't give them airtime. They shouldn't give them spaces in print, inches in print. Because, the principle underlying all this from Mr. and Mrs. Levin, thou shalt not bear false witness. And the idea is that you don't want to promote a lie, because when you promote a lie, you're repeating it. That makes it stronger. Even if you debunk it, it's still stronger.
So are you suggesting that news organizations should not be giving the President of the United States airtime?
Well, Margaret Sullivan's suggestion, she's from the Post, she suggests her solution is to put these statements into a truth sandwich. For whoever, if you're going to present a lie, you say, hey, this is a lie. It should, I'm speaking right now in the black and white clear cases, of which there are a lot. So if somebody's going to lie, say, hey, this is a lie, then you present the lie, and then you document thoroughly why it's a lie. You know, when it comes to gray statements, that's harder. That's a lot harder. But there's enough black and white bad stuff for Margaret to suggest that. Dana Boyd from Dana Society, near here, she says sometimes you have to enforce strategic silence. If you know someone's going to lie, just don't repeat what they say, because the folks who are lying are using techniques with a high degree of expertise. They know if they say something provocative, their provocative statements will be covered and repeated. But if you don't give them any oxygen, they can't disinform anyone.
I like that you think that the field is getting better and that there's hope there, but I do think the economic model is really deteriorating rapidly. We've seen, just in the last month or so, we saw Mike close its doors. Our local journalism ecosystem has been greatly weakened, as you know. What do you think? I mean, you're a business person. You've done well with Craigslist. What do you think the economic future is for the industry?
Well, I've been studying the actual data science and history of newspaper revenues in particular. And not much was available, actually, until an economist named Thomas Bechtel. What this guy did is he took a look at newspaper revenues, and he adjusted. This is from the 50s or 60s. He adjusted for inflation and the number of households in the U.S., because this guy knows what he's doing. And he found that there's a straight line decline in newspaper revenues since the 50s or 60s, starting when TV news began. My instincts, which I don't always rely on, say that Craigslist must have had an effect, say that the big platforms must have had a bigger effect, but he runs the numbers, and he shows the big effect was electronic media, and this goes back to the 50s or so, shortly after I was born. And also before I was born, Dr. Seuss, in If I Ran the Zoo, invented the term nerd, thereby prophesying my coming.
So that's sort of an indirect way of refuting the charge that you have sort of single-handedly destroyed newspapers. I'm not done.
Okay.
And the headline of a recent profile of you in the New York Times, I think it started, Craig Newmark, newspaper villain, is working to save journalism. So how do you feel about continually being cast as a villain, and how does that sit with you?
Well, the first part of that harkens back to a Seinfeld episode where George pretends to be a bad boy to get a woman attracted to that. So the part of me that is George Costanza, and remember, he's a very good-looking short guy with a great head of hair when he's not trying the toupee. I kind of identify a bit with that. So being a bit of a villain is not so bad. But Mr. and Mrs. Levin said, don't bear false witness. So calling myself a newspaper villain is false witness, and I think the bad boy approach is totally out for me.
Well, now you're a popular guy, right? Everyone wants to meet you, talk to you, pitch their ideas to you. How many pitches a day do you guess that you get?
If anyone thinks I'm all that popular or big, needs to get out more. I do get relatively frequent pitches. I don't know how to deal with them yet, but I'm learning rapidly, because sometimes you can tell when someone has an approach which could work and some which can't. So often the missing part is that people who don't know how to communicate what they're doing and they don't want to learn, and that's a considerable problem. There are cases of nonprofits where they are doing really good work, just don't know how to talk about it, so I will restrict some funding to them getting serious communications and PR help.
One of the things that has always struck me about you is your commitment to customer service at Craigslist. It actually is something that I think you can, am I right, you continue to play that role on an occasional basis?
Right now I do it mostly on a volunteer basis. People find me via my Craigslist address or via social media, and what I do is the minimum amount, because usually I'll find out what's going on, gather additional data, and then send it to the woman who runs Craigslist customer service. The idea is that my motive for doing it now is to find out what's real, what's going on. Are people suffering out there? I'm concerned because during the 2008 recession, going into 2009, I could see a lot of people suffering, having to do a lot of bartering, selling their businesses and so on. So I sympathize with that, maybe had a couple good ideas to help a little bit. And I have a feeling we may be seeing a recession this coming year, so I'm mentally preparing myself and telling people on the staff about this. We'll see what happens. And then thinking again, Craigslist basics, meaning Craigslist helps you put food on the table, Craigslist helps you get a table, and then Craigslist helps you get a roof under which to put the table. These are good things, particularly in a recession.
One of the issues that I faced as the dean of the school when the prospect of having Craig's name on our school was people wanting to dig back into his history and into the history of Craigslist, and would it sort of in any way tarnish the school to have his name associated with us? And certainly there are episodes during the history of Craigslist where there were prostitution charges, there were all kinds of sort of sting operations and the FBI. So can you speak to why, when you see your name on the school, you think that's an okay thing for us? I assume that you are happy to defend that.
Well, the deal is that the way we ran the thing is a business model, doing well by doing good, monetizing as little as possible. Because in '99, when the Silicon Valley bankers approached me, and VCs as well, venture capitalists, they said, hey, I could make some billions. And I said, I don't need to make billions. Mr. and Mrs. Levin taught me to know when enough is enough. That was one big decision, which was not altruistic. It just felt right because I have, as a result, what I call nerd values. Once you make enough to provide for yourself and your family and help out friends, what's the point in making more? The deal with other events, in our history, you may be confusing things with a really successful law enforcement operation that we had, which we couldn't talk about at the time.
But could you talk about it now?
Well, where Craigslist, when I was completely out of management at this point, where Craigslist had a really successful law enforcement operation, staying silent about it, but a few years later, getting an award for the FBI for both helping them with the situation, rescuing a lot of people, rescuing over a couple thousand women, and the hard part, keeping our mouths shut about it. I'll be speaking to someone in the Manhattan DA's office tomorrow, because they were the first person who taught me that I need to keep my mouth shut about law enforcement. I will review that lesson with them tomorrow, because when you're watching cop shows on TV and you see cops getting irritated at reporters for saying too much, they're serious, and unless you're a law enforcement officer, if you say too much about anything, you could be running the best program possible for them, but if you compromise it, they will not be happy.
So you mentioned choosing not to monetize Craigslist as much as you could have. And today's paper, those of us who still get the New York Times delivered to their front door, as I do, You know, the Facebook story was yet another example of a tech platform apparently running amok and doing everything that's possible to monetize its operations. How do you think, you know, Facebook and Google are essentially have taken the advertising revenue that was supporting our industry? How do you feel about the tech platforms? How do you think journalistic organizations should be interacting with them at this point?
Well, I can't address the journalism issue in general because I'm helping the people who are the real experts in that. And first, I don't want to screw things up. That's the principle of do no harm. But my focus, working directly with the platforms, with people in intelligence and so on, is to reach out to the platforms and say, how do we do a better job ethically? How do we do a better job countering information warfare coming from both foreign and domestic bad actors? So for some years now, I've been indulging in quiet back-channel diplomacy, a phrase which a nerd really should never be uttering. But that's what I do. Again, this Jeff Jarvis guy is my mentor in this regards, and he'll be doing some of this, I believe, within some hours. But the deal is that the people at the platforms kind of have an idea now of what's gone wrong. They're eager to do things a lot better, and people like Jeff, secondarily me, there's others too, I'll get to in a moment, but we're trying to help the platforms do what they know that they should do. Maybe they kind of forgot that they should treat people like they want to be treated, which is a normal adult thing. We forget that.
So do you not think, you think Facebook should not be regulated at this point?
I have a feeling we should see a mix of solutions which includes some regulation, but given the atmosphere in Washington, I think it's unlikely we'll get good legislation there. The people in Sacramento are doing very, very good work, and I think Sacramento will lead Washington. The downside of that, a terrible downside, is that I may have to go to Sacramento. Although I'm sure Sacramento is lovely, and the levees won't break any time and flood everyone. But I'm sure it's just as beautiful as, say, Yonkers.
What is going on in Sacramento?
They are pioneering things like new data privacy laws and so on, and asking bunches of questions. There's hope in a number of places. Omidyar Network, with my help and others, they're doing the CS Ethical Challenge, which is an attempt at putting ethical training directly into computer science training. Because a lot of times people forget in computers to consider the ramifications of what they're doing. Because they write code which may make it easier for other parties to look at people's private information, not thinking that when you're looking at someone's private information, that person should have the ability to volunteer that information. They need to have informed consent, and people tend to forget that. In some respects, the Europeans are ahead of us with their general data protection regulations.
Do you think that, local journalism is perhaps the place where we've seen the biggest crash, and you've put $5 million so far into the New York City local journalism ecosystem, $2.5 million to WNYC and their newsroom, and $2.5 million into a new digital nonprofit called The City, which will be launching in early part of next year. What do you see as the prospects for local journalism without that kind of deep philanthropic support?
I don't know what it will be without that support. What I do know is for good local journalism to spread throughout the country, including news deserts like New York City, the idea is that for people who have some means of helping out, to actually help out, meaning contributing influence and also cash. And so that's something I'm doing. For example, I can't direct coverage. I'm heartened by Gothamist's coverage of Mandarin Duck, while not forgetting my favorite, of course, Pizza Rat.
Craig is a serious birder, by the way.
And I'm a fan of all vermin, really.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I believe Myron Kandel is going to flip around the room like Oprah with a microphone. So start thinking of your questions.
Oh, the new Oprah.
It's the new Oprah. So my last question has to do with government funding of journalism. There are some people who believe that one of the only ways to sustain journalism going forward is for us to have some kind of dedicated tax stream or revenue stream supported by government funding. What do you think of that idea?
I honestly don't know. I do know that we have an all-hands-on-deck situation right now. And so instead of waiting, it's time to take action. Government funding may or may not be a good idea, but for sure, it's not going to happen soon. So, time to act.
I actually have two unrelated questions. One, how has Craigslist been affected? Has it been attacked by the Russian troll farms or any other foreign government?
I wouldn't know since I'm not in management, but I don't hear any chatter about it. And frankly, would not be a good platform to propagate disinformation.
Until the recession hits, but okay. How and why have you resisted going public? And can you tell us about some of the more egregious approaches you've had by investment bankers and venture capitalists?
Well, I've only been involved in this really like 20 years ago, but there's, again, the principles, how much money is enough? And I don't know what I would do with $1 billion or more. That's why I can help you. You know, sorry, you already have helped me.
I'm still working on it.
But the idea is that, again, what's the point of making all that money? I could have fast cars and big houses, or alternatively, fast houses and big cars. And I'm not interested in either. I do overindulge myself in gadgets a bit, although they have to serve a purpose, and that's about it. And that makes for a very modest lifestyle. So again, what's the point in all that money? It feels better now to, well, like at the CUNY J School, which when you say Newmark J School, by the way, remember Jerry Seinfeld going, "Hello, Newman." You should say Newmark in that manner. But the deal is that the CUNY is all about giving people a break for a good education that they wouldn't get otherwise. I got the same kind of break at Case Tech from Case Western. Frankly, my family was expected to contribute zero, although I made it up in scholarships and working when I was at school. So I wanted to pay it forward, although with a pretty large force multiplier.
Craig, over here.
I want to ask Dean Bartlett if the interrogator does not mind being asked a question.
Go for it.
So you've had a wonderful bonanza in a great size, and you will carry the school forward, I am sure. Have you gotten any interesting little new awards that we might want to hear about?
So that's a setup question, nevertheless. I'm going to answer it factually, and then I'm going to let Betsy give her little plug. So the truth is that the gift is an endowment, and we have a year when we can't touch it at all, so that it can start to hopefully accumulate. The markets have not been kind, and so until it really generates investment income, which could take another year or two, we are still in the business of seeking support particularly for scholarships for our students. And I'm delighted to report that there is a new one, and Betsy can give you a little more information about it. How's that? Did I do it?
You're perfect. What a setup. The Anne O'Hare McCormick Award, which has been presented since her death in 1954, to honor the first single woman to win a Pulitzer Prize and the first woman at the New York Times to win a Pulitzer Prize. This award went year by year to a huge number of women who otherwise would have not have been able to go to Columbia because of its enormous expense. And now the trustees of the fund, who are gathering money in the fields, not in the kind of billions you talk about, sir, for either $10 at a time, have created a scholarship which Dean Bartlett and her board have accepted to start next year at the Newmark School of Journalism. And now that I know who he is, I may give you a lecture on who N.O. McCormick was, but not tonight.
Thank you. And I want to also give a shout out to the Silurians, because we also have a scholarship here, and we're very grateful for that. Every little bit helps. Our just so you know, our tuition for 3 semesters for a New York State resident is $18,000, which is really remarkable that you can get a master's degree for, in the larger scheme of things, what is a relatively small dollar figure. But for many of our students who are sometimes first generation, children of immigrants, it's might as well be $60,000. So the scholarships are really incredibly important. I think Alex Jones has his hand up over there.
On my way over there, tell us briefly how you started Craigslist.
Early '95, a lot of people had helped me out in San Francisco. I thought I should give back and maybe connect with people better. And so I started a simple email list about events in San Francisco. At some unknown part, added jobs, housing, and it kept spreading word of mouth. And, you know, in the middle of '95, when I had too many addresses for the email tool I was using, I had to use a listserv. I was going to call it SF Events, mostly events still. I'm a nerd and very literal-minded. People around me told me they already called it Craigslist, that I had inadvertently created a brand. They told me what a brand is, seriously, and I saw that they were right, and that's the beginning of the naming part.
First, it's inspiring what you're doing, and second, you clearly have, like me, seen every Seinfeld episode more than one time, and you've gotten some of your timing very, very nicely down.
Oh, that's good.
You mentioned the fact that your gifts are to nonprofits. Have you made any thought or given any thought to making gifts to for-profit news organizations for funding the areas of their coverage that do not lend themselves to advertising support, like education and politics and so forth?
Well, I have as few thoughts as possible. Thought as in my life, mostly this got me in trouble. And that's more to be taken literally than you might think. I've briefly considered at times helping fund for-profit activities, but whenever I consider one, I always find one or more nonprofit activities that are doing the same job, so I should keep my life simple and focus on the nonprofits. That becomes easier because in journalism, it's become relatively easy to get nonprofits in journalism to work with each other and to collaborate. So I have nothing against the for-profits, but I'm already focusing in an area which works out pretty well, and I can do only a limited amount of stuff.
Obviously, Craigslist has taken away retail advertising and has taken away some classified advertising. Do you see any other parts of journalism that electronics or the computer will be taking away in the future from the current newspapers?
Well, without citing any specific cause, journalism ads have been sucked away by electronic media since the 50s. TV was the start. There's been a lot of other effects because the banner ad was invented well before Craigslist was a thing. Now people think the revenue is mostly going to the platforms, but I actually haven't seen a breakdown of the actual numbers at all. And since the conventional wisdom in this area is normally wrong, I would wait till I saw the numbers. That is, again, when it comes to newspaper economics, people have been almost always wrong. So I wait for economists like Thomas Bechtel and also Ken Doctor to actually look at the numbers to come to a conclusion because nerd, meaning that as a nerd, I actually did get a lot of mathematics education, and so I wait to see some actual evidence. Also, now that I think about it, watching too many cop shows where they say, follow the evidence, that's influenced me. So I don't want to come to conclusions before I've seen evidence, unless it's funny.
Craig, all the way to your right.
What is your view of independent entrepreneurs such as yourself underwriting or, in fact, buying publications? I'm thinking of the Washington Post, the Atlantic, and I gather the Los Angeles Times now as well.
Well, Jeff Bezos running, or let's say buying and not so much running, the Washington Post has worked out really, really well. That's pretty good. Others I'm not sure about because I haven't had the experience. I know Mark Benioff, and I think he will do a good job with time, but that's because I've worked with him in a number of areas, particularly supporting veterans organizations, so I will commit a leap of faith with him. That's always a possibility. I can only address that in my case because I work with the American Press Institute and a guy named Tom Rosenstiel. They wrote a paper or two about the ethics of funding nonprofit journalism, and I'm adhering to it, and maybe sometime I should raise it with other people if I ever feel that courageous. Frankly, if I'm going to raise anything with like Jeff Bezos, and I have, but I wanted him to pick up the TV show from the Expanse from Sci-Fi because I just love that show. And if I'm going to waste my moment with Jeff Bezos, it'll be for a really good show which is all about international relations, even though it takes place in space. Did I say that I'm a nerd?
Hi, Craig. Thank you for your time today. I'm just curious, since you're so plugged into the media right now, where do you get most of your news today, and who do you think is doing the best job?
Okay. I'm plugged into a whole bunch of sources. It's hard to differentiate them anyway. I do try hard to pay attention to the newspaper brand and the byline of the reporter. So I do subscribe to a whole bunch of papers and magazines, maybe about 8, and I got a lot of RSS feeds because that's a good way to condense stuff. Yeah, and a lot of that's straight news. A lot of that is gadget and technology news because, nerd. Thank you. And so that's what I get a lot of that. That's what I get a lot of stuff from. In straight news, a very neutral source, a very good one, is Tegan Goddard's Political Wire, because what he does is he excerpts news about what's going on, provides a little summary, a little more if you pay for a service, and so he gives you really quick summaries which get to the point really fast. That's worth a few bucks each month. Sorry?
TV.
Any? Television? News journalism is mostly John Oliver and Stephen Colbert. I do regard satirical news as valid and possibly the most effective form of news. Okay, I can't remember the guy's name now, but if you want to tell people the truth, make them laugh, otherwise they'll kill you. And he had a lapse, they killed him.
It's the
Irish guy.
The
Lily Irish guy, not Conan O'Brien. Although that would be funny, but they haven't killed him yet.
We had Andy Borowitz here a few months ago.
Scott Wilde. Wilde Scott?
I just wanted to say we had Andy Borowitz here a few months ago, fitting with your idea of satirical news. But I have a quick question. You deny being a villain in the destruction of local newspapers, and you pointed out that newspapers were in decline even before you came along. But if you, on the positive side, if you had a recommendation for a local newspaper now bereft of classified advertising. What's your formula for it to succeed?
I don't know. I don't want to know, because John Thornton at Texas Tribune and the American Journalism Project, they seem to have a really good plan for making that work for local journalism. I've read it, although I didn't really absorb a lot out of it, because I don't know how news business really runs in depth. Otherwise, I'd be an editor or a publisher. The thing is that that's where to look for good advice on how to do that. That's the American Journalism Project. I'm seriously supporting it, but I'm taking it as a bit of an act of faith, because their plan makes a lot of sense to me.
So let me just give a little more background on that, if I could. So the Texas Tribune, for those aren't familiar with it, was created because there was literally no coverage of the State House in Texas, and John Thornton was the founder of it. It now has, I think, 40 or 50 reporters. It's a gigantic success, strictly nonprofit. It was the model for the new publication that we're launching in New York called The City, and he's now creating something called the American Journalism Project that he's trying to raise initially, I think, $50 million, and he's well on his way to launching in small cities around the country the equivalent of the Texas Tribune, these local nonprofit journalism outlets. It's an incredibly exciting venture, and I think you'll hear a lot more about it in 2019. Sorry for that.
Yes. I work with a journalism organization, and I'd like to know, what is the application process for asking for funding for that group? They do a lot of good work, and we'd like to know, how can we approach you?
You mean my stuff?
Yes.
Go to craignewmarkphilanthropies.org. You'll see a description of the kind of stuff we're looking for, because it's not just journalism. It's not just journalism. It also includes, go to craignewmarkphilanthropies.org. You'll see a list of the priorities we have, and you'll see an application process, which is a streamlined version done by the frightening Mabel. It's as streamlined as you can get without unduly tempting the taxing authorities. And behind it, there's me who will evaluate it, and then I'll get help from other people depending on the specialty area. For example, I have a feeling this coming year, voter protection won't diminish in importance. It might increase in importance. I am putting more of a focus on information warfare, because when I'm in my head, when I'm talking about trustworthy journalism, I'm also thinking information warfare, cybersecurity, and so on. That's kind of the abstract approach I take. Being a nerd and having read science fiction for over 50 years. Because the stuff that the science fiction people predicted is happening now. A better prediction is Marshall McLuhan, who said that World War III will be a guerrilla information war fought equally by civilian and military participants. And a lot of people, including myself, but yesterday, I think in the Times, Renee DiResta describes what's going on as information world war. And actually, the Russians for 5 years have been telling us that.
Craig, you've been hanging around with a lot of journalists these days. Does that mean you don't believe we're enemies of the people?
I mostly believe that they're a great source of inducement for me to drink more scotch, which I appreciate.
Do you think the words that are coming out of the White House these days about journalists do some lasting harm to American society?
I think the words coming out of the White House do us a great deal of good, because they serve to remind us each and every day that, again, this is all hands on deck. We're all in this together. We got to get it working. And so November 2016 was a wake-up call for us. We have to work together. We have to get our act together. And otherwise, bad things will happen and get worse.
Who's got a great last question for our guest tonight?
Oh, but it has to be great. So no pressure.
Guarantee a good question.
Since your expertise is in the nerd world, what are the nerds doing to overcome, if anything, besides monetizing it even more, all this misinformation, Russian, Chinese, whoever wants to infiltrate our social structure? What are the nerds doing? What's their attitude? Because when you hear them talk in Congress, if they even want to talk in Congress, they're evading everything.
There's a whole bunch of different kinds of nerds. This week on Monday, 2 groups of nerds at New Knowledge, the Columbia Tau School, and the Oxford Internet Research Group. They published 2 reports, and what they're doing, these nerds, showed what was happening by both foreign and domestic bad actors. What were they doing to hurt the election? They went into the analysis fairly deep, showed what was happening, showed how they affected Americans both directly and then indirectly through mainstream news. They showed how they affect regular people who could be exploited as assets, and suggested the beginning of means by which the effect of both foreign and domestic bad actors that could be neutralized. So those nerds actually did a great deal for us. Those reports both launching on Monday. I'm concerned for them because this kind of stuff gets the attention of Russian military intelligence, and those are not polite people, particularly since one of their branches is the Russian mob. And so the people doing all this good work are in physical danger. Journalists, people doing this kind of investigation, they're doing scary stuff. So these nerds are not only doing good work for the whole world and for our country in particular, but they're doing so at significant risk, which is why I'm putting some effort into nonprofits which focus on keeping such investigators safe. That includes, I'm talking with Reporters Without Borders. Now and then I'll bump into Committee to Protect Journalists. And I'll even, when I speak to someone at a newspaper, I'll ask them, what are they doing to protect their people? Because a lot of people here, particularly women here, will often get harassed online, often in very ugly ways. That's not right. So I do talk to the platform people and now on about that. I actually have funded a project at Wikipedia to help with that, because their women writers and editors are subject to harassment in a way that's hurt Wikipedia substantially.
Craig and Sarah, thank you both for your support of journalism.